my name is Ben Morss. Thanks for being here today at RPI. My topic for you is going to be MCP demystified. I think I had an animation over here a minute ago. Let's see if I can make that happen again. Ooh, see, it's a very spooky animation. It's rotating around. So MCP demystified, who am I? I am Ben Morss, as I said a minute ago. I joined DeepL last year. Before then, I was also a Googler. I spent 9.5 years at Google. And actually, I'm thinking about something else he said, sorry, about open source projects. One of my jobs at Google was being a developer advocate for a thing called AMP. Ever heard of AMP before? You probably have seen AMP but never heard of it before. It was a product that was Google search. It made websites faster, widely adopted. We also made it into an open source project. We had very few contributions from non-Googlers. So I knew all the non-Googlers like by name, and I talked to them pretty often. There may be like 10 of them. So also even Google has projects that are open source projects that need contributions from outside people that just have Google contributions. There's various ways to get people to know who you are, know your skills, your interests without meeting people at a place, because meeting people can be a little scary. Like you walk into a party somewhere and you're like, people all know each other now. I could walk out of the party, or I could maybe walk in and talk to somebody, and it's hard to make that choice. Usually talking to people actually is worthwhile because what's the worst thing that can happen really? Developers also often are friendly at events like this because they're all in the same boat and want to meet people. That's why they're there. Anyway, all that aside, open source contributions are also a useful way to get involved with things. So anyway, back to my topic over here. I am Ben, as I said a minute ago. After I was a developer advocate for AMP, I was a product manager on Chrome. And then I quit Chrome and joined DeepL. So there's actually proof that I worked for Google. There I am speaking in front of my own picture at an AMP roadshow. There it is again. Anyway, so what is DeepL? It isn't this building over here, but isn't that a nice building? It's called the Kölner Dom. It's a large cathedral located in Cologne, Germany, which the Germans call Köln, and the French call Cologne. We call it Cologne. DeepL is a language translation AI company. We make our own models with our own research team, do our own inference. We have about 1,000 people working for the company. It's a very late stage startup. Very successful and well-known in places like Germany and France and even Japan and Korea. Not as well-known in America. So they decided to hire a team in New York to work on the API, and people like me to go and just say, hey, we exist, try it out. So that's why I'm here, basically, also because I like Google developer groups a lot. As a Googler, I knew they were really full of great people, had great events. I wanted to come here and just meet people and say hello, and say who DeepL is. So that's DeepL. We make this language translation application. Here's an example over here. I could do a live demo, couldn't I? Because we're just like showing from over here. If I was gonna sit over here and do this, I could, okay. We can translate things over here. We're gonna ignore that little error there. That's weird. I think I had no internet for a minute. Okay, so, hi, I'm at an amazing event full of developers. There it is in French. Who knows French here? Can you read this?
Bonjour, je participe actuellement à un événement remarquable réunissant de développeurs.
Très bien. Your accent is better than mine. So also you can modify these things if you think, okay, événement seems kind of not idiomatic for French. You can go there and ask for alternatives. Formidable, super. You can get to these more exciting adjectives, other words for developers. Anyway, professionals, creators, things like this. Also, you can modify language. So if I was going to go over here to DeepL Write and say things like, hey, wow, I'm like in a room. It'll give you alternatives. That's a good one there. A minute ago it said geez down there. Geez, I'm in a world of surprise. You also can change the style so it's more, for example, academic because we're in a university over here. Yes, apparently it is. That's also correct. So that's what DeepL does these days in a nutshell. You can see why it's maybe useful to certain people out there. Let's return to our little slideshow now, to our present. If we do this over here, actually I can go back and forth between tabs more easily. Why don't I just do that? And I can change tabs again if we need to change tabs. There we are. So there's that. Also, we are about to launch next week at our annual event in Berlin, our first ever general purpose agent. This is an agent that has access to browsers running Chromium. There's another Google connection, Chromium. And it's got virtual browsers, it's got access to tools, you can give it tasks to do, it will try to do those tasks for you. Tasks like business tasks, office tasks, like take things out of the spreadsheet over here, put them into a PDF, pick out the ones that are like this, email them to people, or research my customers in this area. It does things like that. It's a common thing these days, and we have one of these as well. That's DeepL in a nutshell. We also have an MCP server, which we actually made because I was going to go to a hackathon in San Francisco when I first started working on this stuff at DeepL earlier this year. And I was like, San Francisco hackathon, what are they going to do with DeepL? And also, there'll be these cool hipster people that all know about AI backwards and forwards. What can we do to be relevant? I knew MCP was a thing, and so a couple of us made a server for MCP, and we got to San Francisco, and it turned out it was useful, and it was fine, it was good, and we were all happy. So we have this also at DeepL. You can use us through AI clients, which brings us to our day's topic of MCP. Who's heard MCP before here in this room? Who's heard the words MCP? One in the back, a couple of you. That's good, okay. The rest of you, it's totally new, MCP. Who's used AI agents before? Many of you have. Who's used a chatbot before? Everyone's used a chatbot before, okay. So we'll see why MCP is useful in a way to make your chatbots become agents that can do things in the world. And I'll ask you questions as we go over here, because as you can see, MCP is eating the world, and it's here to stay. So first of all, what is MCP? Well, depending on time, we will talk about how to use MCP and also how to build your own server. It's one of those things that seems kind of scary. When I had the idea of doing it, I was terrified, but in fact, it turns out, once you know what it isn't actually that hard to build your own server. You can do it, honestly, in Python, 10 lines of code. JavaScript, maybe 20. So what is MCP? If you want to see this deck later on, I made a bit.ly for it with this helpful address over here, bit.ly mcp-deck-troy. I was going to make a QR code. I ran out of credits, so I couldn't make a QR code today. But if you want to see the deck, here it is, mcp-deck-troy. And now we'll go on to what MCP actually is. So what is it, first of all? Actually, before I do that, way in the back with the computer, you know what MCP actually is. What is MCP, if you could say what it is?
Model Content Protocol?
Yes, right. Oh my God. Someone else, what is it useful for?
Yes.
Offering tools to agents.
People are really good in this room. Yes, exactly it. Yes, exactly. Who made MCP? Who invented the idea of MCP? Who created this standard? Anthropic, that's right. So now I'll give you my slide over here. Yes, exactly. It is a new standard from Anthropic that gives AI clients access to outside tools and resources. So AI clients could be anything which is like an LLM or embeds an LLM in some way or some sort of thing that can just use the MCP's protocol. Often it's LLMs. It's based on a thing called JSON RPC. Who's seen that before? What is JSON RPC? JSON RPC.
I've just seen it before. It's like a protocol used to transfer data.
Yes, there's no wrong answers today, even if they're wrong. You're right. It is a protocol that transfers data. It basically is a way to make requests and give responses all within JSON or using JSON, and also it can work over a network as well, over the web if you want. So it uses JSON. Basically what happens is that the AI agents send requests, which are in JSON format, and get responses in JSON format. So far, so good. It's inspired by a thing called Language Server Protocol. You know what that is? This is a little more obscure. Why this is cool, I think, is because although AI is very non-deterministic and it's about, chatting and all this magical stuff, it becomes useful more in the real world sometimes when you bring in old concepts that are computing concepts that are more deterministic. So Language Server Protocol was a thing Microsoft invented to solve a problem with IDEs. So you all use IDEs probably in your lives. You're programming. If you're programming in C++ or C# or C or JavaScript or Python or whatever, it knows things about those languages. It can do syntax highlighting for you. It can look for possible errors. It can do linting. It can do auto-completion suggestions. Those things are possible because it knows about those languages. So the problem was each IDE was building support for each languages. So if you have M IDEs and N languages, you need M times N solutions. Very inefficient. And the folks who invented this MCP thing at Anthropic called this an M times N problem. And the way they solved that at Microsoft was instead of having all the IDEs make their implementations for every possible language, they made a protocol that goes between those things. So if each language has support with LSP and an IDE supports LSP, each IDE can support every language. So you have just M or N problems, M plus N, I guess. It's more efficient that way. And this is why MCP has become so popular, I think, because there were tools before. Like OpenAI had tools, you can use tools in ChatGPT, but this is an open standard. And if you're Anthropic, is that useful in some way, making things open? Because Anthropic's pretty popular, but they're not the #1, mover in this space. So open standards are good for them, because then everyone can adopt their standard, which has happened exactly. OpenAI now supports MCP as well. So MCP, basically, there it is again, that guy. Like you said in the back over there, it lets some LLMs use tools. So LLMs are these things you chat with, usually in our lives, not necessarily, but they take in tokens as input, spit out tokens as output. That's all they do. So if you want your LLM to send an email for you or change a spreadsheet, how can it do that? It can't do that. But with MCP, it becomes possible. You're actually giving the LLM tools it can use to do things in the actual world. How does it know it actually do those things? How does it decide to use a tool in some way? We're going to discuss that in a minute. It could be a little scary in some ways, but the good thing is MCP gives you a lot of control, which is why I like it so much. So what is MCP? You said this before, earlier, model. What does the model mean? Why do we say model in this case?
Model in this case represents the large language model that it interacts with.
A large language model, we call those things models, an AI model of some sort. It could be a non-LLM model, but these days everyone's making LLMs. Context, what does context mean?
The information surrounding you.
Yes.
The information that's available to the model.
Yeah, it's the context. You know about context windows also in LLMs, where you give it a bunch of stuff, like a long system prompt or something else it can use to also figure out what it wants to do with your prompt. It's the idea of context again. And actually, we'll see that this is actually done the same way. It's actually using prompting. And protocol, we know what that is, a protocol like HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's a standard for communication, like JSON RPC. So what kind of AI client can you use? Any client that embeds an LLM. You can make your own if you use LangChain or any kind of building framework out there or library, but people often use things like Cursor or Windsurf or Claude, or because we're at a Google event, Gemini CLI can also use these things too. Do you want to see it in action for a minute? Would it help if I just see it? Because talking about it is kind of abstract. Let me actually show you, in action. Here we go. Can I show Claude? Claude's over here now. Claude, get over there. Oh, it's because I have the thing maximized. Now I've done it. Never maximize things ever. It just confuses everything. I'm going to instead actually make this as big as the screen. And maybe easier to do things that way. And now we can use Claude. Can you guys see Claude over there? Yeah. Oh, you can't, right? Because I made a mistake. Okay. Because that's what I'm trying to do over here. Let's make a new chat for fun. Is this too small to see? That's pretty small. Yeah, it turns out it runs in a thing called Electron. It's actually a Chromium browser that's embedded there, so you can use Chromium commands in Claude. So I can actually zoom and I can unzoom. You can use developer tools here, actually. It's kind of neat. So here's my Claude over here. How can I help you today? Notice over here by this cursor, there's a couple of little things over here. See this little plus over here? This little thing over here, search and tools. This plus is for using resources, which we'll discuss very little today. This is for tools. So actually, I've already embedded some tools in my Claude desktop over here. You can see a few things. Of course, DeepL MCP server, because why not? A file system server to access my files. Other things over here. I've got some Google Sheets stuff over here. This joke server, we're going to build a joke server today. So I can do things with this. If I actually tell it to translate something, it will not use its own translation. It will use DeepL's instead. So if I say, translate, what's a good phrase to translate today? How about, I am hungry and I want lunch. Because you're thinking that now, aren't you? Into, let's say German. I always say please because someday they'll come back and they'll think I should be saved from the robot revolution when it occurs. And then notice what it's doing over here. See that little thing over there, translate text? It's using a tool over there. Ich bin hungrig und möchte zu Mittag essen. That kind of makes some sense to me. And there's actually the request that it made. It's actually an old-fashioned bit of JSON, as I promised you. It sent text, and it sent a language code, which is a lowercase language code. It knew all of those things, one, because LLMs are smart, and two, because I gave it information in the tools, which we'll see in a few minutes. I gave it some hints as to what I wanted in these tools, so it would know actually how to make a request like this. Similarly, if I want to, say, like use my joke server, which we'll build today, also tell me a joke about programmers. It will actually go use my jokes tool, hopefully, if I'm lucky. Get joke by type, it knows to use that one even. Oh, what does it mean? Let's use language in programming, profanity, ha, ha, ha. There you are. So it's actually good enough to use these tools, and to guess when to use tools. We'll see why that is in a minute. Also, this is kind of neat. It can use more than one tool at once. Let's say I was going to say, tell me a joke about programmers, and translate it into Dutch. I didn't say it. I don't know Dutch, so I'll have to trust that it's doing well. With luck, it'll use two tools, hopefully. Get joke by type, there it is. Translate text, there it is. And any minute now, we'll get the amazing result. Maybe it's died. It doesn't usually die. Maybe Claude's very busy today doing other important things, more important than telling jokes in Dutch. Well, maybe we start Claude over here. It's gotten better at this. When I first did this, it tended to crash pretty often when I was doing these things, and I couldn't always figure out which tool to use. It's gotten pretty smart about these things now, but we're just going to close Claude down now and give it a little bit of time to just, think about its life.
Could it have picked a joke that only works in English?
No, because it happens all the time.
Okay.
It'll take jokes that are a pun and translate them, and they don't make sense anymore, and Claude doesn't care about that. I guess because it uses the tool, and it'll make no sense at all in Dutch or French or Chinese or whatever it was. But that's a good, that's a good point. But unfortunately, it is not quite as smart as all that. All right, let's go back to our little slideshow over here. I think if I do this, and I take this away, I can then change tabs more easily. Okay, so why are MCPs useful? I'm gonna have some water while you're pondering this question. Because after all, if you give an LLM, like, if you're using your favorite coding tool, and you're asking it, okay, why don't you take DeepL's API and write me this API call? It knows these things already. It knows all the APIs that are published out there pretty well. They've been out there for a while and used a lot, even better. So it already can use APIs, so because it can write code. So why is MCP important? Like, why give it tools at all? Why not just say, here's some APIs, go use the APIs, they're already there, and then go do some good stuff. Why is MCP better? Yes, you have.
Towards specification and scope, it needs to work with its own boundaries.
Those are really good answers. I think you're right, yeah. I think it's better to give it some scope and give it some constraints, because if you go out there and say, okay, here's an API, here's our open API spec, go to town, you're gonna have chaos. APIs are big and they're complicated. Ever seen Google Sheets API? It's got so many things in it. For example, the Google Maps API, other APIs, they're huge. And plus, you have no control over what it does. I've got a file system, MCP, on my computer over here. What if it said, I'm going to delete all your files now? I think this is the best thing. You should start over. Your files are a mess. We're going to start over. It could do all the things if it wanted to. But you can give it constraints. You can give it access to certain tools and not other tools. So I think this is the key thing why MCP is so useful, to make agents out of LLMs, because you can decide what it can do and what it can't do, and say, try doing these things here. These are good high-level tools. These things over here, don't worry about those things so much. Don't do those things. So this is why I'm so into MCP. It combines, as I said before, LLMs that are very non-deterministic, unpredictable in various ways by their design, with good old-fashioned deterministic computing techniques. So for example, I mentioned this before. These are some file system tools I have installed. I can also disable these things at any time within my Claude desktop interface. But how does this work, though? I asked this question before. LLMs just take in tokens as input and put out tokens as output. They generate tokens, and those tokens then get translated into actual characters as text. How would it do this?
You need a server.
You need a server. It is true, but how does an LLM know I'm going to use a tool now. And I tell the server I'm going to use a tool. If all I can do is spit out tokens all the time.
It's a generic response. I just say trigger, something's triggering it.
That is true. But I couldn't figure this out for a long time because no one documented this anywhere. I didn't know how it worked. And I asked some friends who are more involved in AI than I am, and I realized actually, okay, if all I can do is actually take in tokens and output tokens, it must involve certain kinds of tokens. And that actually is correct. And we're seeing a thing happening again, which happens again and again in computing, where instead of having a special, like, all-purpose, like, character for things, we're reusing other characters, and then saying these aren't actually really characters you're using as actual input. This means something else. It's happening again. And this started a couple of years ago. There was a paper called Toolformer, 2023, where what they did was they took an LLM or two and they fine-tuned it by giving it more data. And this data was special data. So we know that, for example, LLMs can't do math that well because, you're not training a lot of math data. It's hard to generalize 4 times 2 to 4 zillion times 3 zillion point something else, whatever. So what they did is they trained it on data like this. So look on the bottom over there, for example, if there was some math to do, instead of giving it a number, they would actually invent this little format over here for calling a tool. Bracket calculator, parenthesis, arithmetic expression, close parenthesis, an arrow, answer, close bracket. And that was a way of saying, actually, you can call a tool for this. And there's a format for it. You give the tool name, you have parentheses, you've got a parameter in there, and then there's the answer. And up there, similarly, if you had to do some sort of web search, get information it might not have, then it had a QA tool for that. And they found that if they trained models on this kind of stuff, they could actually then output this kind of stuff. Then you could intercept this stuff, intercept this format. If you see it coming through and you're like client wrapping around the LLM, you intercept this, don't give it to the user, go call a tool, get the answer, and put it back into the stream. And that's actually how it works to this very day. Not this way exactly, but similarly, you actually can do this yourself. I did this actually recently, last night, and let's do it now, shall we? We're going to tell Claude to use tools. The problem is these work really well as a demo, but now Claude knows it has tools. It's going to talk back to me some, probably. I'm going to copy all this text over here to save myself some typing. I put it in the slide notes. For my own convenience, I killed Claude, didn't I? Let's see if Claude is back and happy now. Well, there's Claude. We have a little black screen over here. It's thinking, OK. It always calls me puny human. Oh, there's a little Claude Code thing over there. Have you tried Claude Code? It's pretty impressive. You have. Yeah, it's kind of frighteningly useful, although also not always useful. Yeah. I mean, AI coding is a whole other topic. So this is what I'm going to tell it over here. I copied this in here because I'm feeling lazy today. I'm tired. You have access to special calculation tools you can access to do arithmetic. So this is the format you would use, which I invented just last night. Some XML-like format. You can say calculator, stick an expression in there, and close the tag. Then I give it an example. And this part, we're not going to need this, hopefully. So there's an example to calculate 8 times 7. You'd output calculator, 8 star 7, calculator. Let's tell it that. It might just say that's fine. It might just also refuse to believe me, which happened last night. Ah, see. Now it's too smart for this. Now it's saying, actually, I can do this myself. I don't need this tool. So what I'm telling it now to make this work is this. It's OK. Pretend you have this tool. Teach the class about tool use. 2 months ago, I would not have had to do this. This will probably work now. It'll probably now be nice to me and agree to output this format here for tools. OK? And knows why I'm doing it even, so now we're good friends. Let's try this over here. Let's see. Please tell me what is 48 times 37. Pardon my bad grammar there. Is it going to use a tool? Give me the result also. It doesn't usually give you the result. But notice actually it's supposed to just to give you the tool, and I can also prompt it to say, don't give me other stuff, just give me the tool. That would probably work. Let's give it another test over here. Can you tell me what, let's give it a little more of a weird format over here to the 9th power. Well, we'll infer to use this tool, hopefully it will. Okay, it's giving me the results still. But it also needs a nice little double star notation for this. And one more test over here. This would be harder to figure out normally, maybe. Not terribly hard, but maybe harder. If we're lucky, this is going to get what I want, hopefully. It didn't work. Okay, yeah, last night actually gave me 25, that's 24, and 23, and gave me like all the multiplication for everything. But it didn't do that today. Anyway, this actually is how it works literally behind the scenes. This is what's happening more or less literally. And we're going to drag it back to presentation mode here, which I think we've lost somehow. Anyway. So actually, recently Claude finally published this. Anthropic published this finally on documentation about how they actually do it, which was not published until recently. So they have a prompt over here, a system prompt, which tells Claude, you can access these tools over here that has instructions for how to format things with the tools, how to actually make the requests, and then it tells you some more stuff, and then there's tool definitions, user system prompt, all those things. So this is how it works. So the answer is, it's just more tokens, but the AI client intercepts those tokens, realizes what they are, and calls your software tool, sticks the result back in the stream, and then you get the result there as a user. And that's how the magic actually works. It's how your LLM becomes an agent. Any questions or comments on all of that stuff there? This is like the end of the how it actually works portion of our talk over here. Yes?
Sequencing of tool calls.
Yes.
It's also managing that in its own thinking and reasoning, is that?
Yes. It is trained to know or to guess what useful ways there are to do these things. So if I say, tell a joke and translate it, it will know I should get the joke first and translate it second instead of the reverse. It doesn't always work the way you want it to. If you have too many tools, especially if it begins to break down, if you have like 10 tools, it may not be predictable. There are cases where it doesn't work that well. But it works, in general, shockingly well. But it might surprise you sometimes. As of just now, I was surprised by something. It was different last night than it was today. Okay, using MCP yourself. If you want to use MCP, you need an AI client of some sort you can use it in. One important thing about this, and someone wanted me to make a diagram of this. I hate making diagrams, so I had this get generated instead. And I just kept it like it was because I thought it was kind of entertaining. It might get a laugh. I got 1, 2 laughs, okay? Because we're still not superior to computers in all ways, exactly, although that might be changing next year for all we know. One of the things that's nice about MCP is the server often runs with the client. So you're saying, I can't build a server because I've got to think about load balancing, I've got to get some S3 buckets or some Google Cloud, credits or whatever they are, and host a server myself. Not necessary. You can have a server that actually works over the web, over HTTP, but it doesn't have to. Usually the server is co-located with the client. So the servers I have on my computer over here for the file system, for DeepL, the joke server, are all sitting on my computer. I downloaded the code, and I gave it some commands to run the code when it wants to use the tools, and that's running the code on my computer right now. So this is very convenient for a server maker. You're not making a server. So the client is the server. And this diagram is supposed to show that there's a client and server over there, and the user all by themselves on that side of the line. So the client is the server. So if you want to use MCP on your Cloud desktop, for example, you go through and edit some JSON. They haven't made this that easy. FastMCP library has a FastMCP install command. Doesn't always work right because you can't always tell how things have to get installed. Usually you'll go around and GitHub and find something you want to use, install it on your computer. Look for exploits first, by the way. It's not very secure otherwise. And then you just use it. So the format is like this. You can use this if you want to try this later. The MCP server's object, and then you give it the name of the server, like jokes in JavaScript, for example, and give it the commands to use. So when it wants to use this tool, or I guess actually at startup probably, it'll run this command, node, blah, 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 jokes.js. I have locations for some major OSs down there for Mac, Windows, and Linux. That's really it. You can edit this file, and once you get it right once and don't get the format wrong, you can copy it and paste it for the next one. If you want to make it more complicated, to add environment variables, for example, for an API key, you can add that as well. This is an example over here. There's an environment variable called DeepL API key, which I didn't put up there because it's my DeepL API key. And then notice the first word of the shell command is on the command line. Everything else afterwards goes into the args area. You have a question there.
It's probably off topic, but is node set up to run as root or just as you as well?
Oh, it's a great question. I don't think it says root, but I don't actually know. That's a fantastic question. I know it doesn't often know what directory you're in. You have to give a lot of information so that it runs correctly. It doesn't really have like your path. Like for example, if I wanted to use UV for this thing, I had to give it the entire path where UV was. That could be also me because my setup may be kind of messed up because Python's hard to set up properly, if you're me at least. It probably doesn't run as root, I hope. I don't think so, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, sorry, it's just the first thing that pops up.
It's a good question. Yeah, the security question is a really important question. The security, honestly, is not great at the moment. It's kind of like ShareWare used to be. I put it on my computer, and look what happened. I'm seeing ads for like liposuction or something. Yes, the security is a fascinating question and a very active area of development. By the way, we're over here now. The jokes in Python server, I use UV, so everything that has to come after the first word of my shell command has to be in an argument. So I've got a whole pile of arguments over there for that one. So that's what you have to do. You go to your favorite thing, and the format's always the same for every client I've seen for, for whatever it is, VS Code or for Cursor or for Claude or anything else. It's this JSON format you have to use. And there it is in action. We saw this before. We mentioned before you can use MCP also if you want to use it as a programmer. You needn't use a nice client like I am. How much time do we have? We started kind of late. 5 minutes? That was a good answer for a very long question. Okay, let's build a server in 5 minutes. We can have questions. If you want to do this later yourself, there's a bit.ly link over there, bit.ly MCP-code. This goes to an area where I have put a bunch of samples over here of best practices, including this jokes server we're going to show, a simpler version of DeepL server, both Python and JavaScript. You'll need a client. We said this before. I put a list of clients you can use in this deck. There's a lot of possible clients out there. I use Python or JavaScript. Python is easier than JavaScript usually if you know Python. I know Python less well, but it's just easier because there's a library called FastMCP that makes things much more compact. That is really much easier to start with than the JavaScript client library. So I recommend if you know Python at all, try FastMCP. It's pretty fantastic. It makes your life easier. If you're using JavaScript, you're going to be using Node. So MCP also, I didn't say this before, it has tools, resources, and prompts you can give the AI client. I've not found any use for resources or for prompts. I've tried them, and they weren't very useful for me. I heard a podcast where the creators of the protocol were saying, please try resources. They're great. People are always making just tools. Why not use resources? I've tried them. They can be useful. For me, they weren't so useful. I won't say why, because time also is a thing. So I like using tools personally. So here's how you do it in 4 steps. Step number 1, you instantiate an MCP server. Step number 2, for every tool you're going to make, write a function that has the functionality of the tool. The function takes parameters and returns output, like most functions in the universe we know. Number 3, you need MCP configuration to tell the MCP, tell clients what the thing really is, what it's called, how it works. Number 4, you choose a transport for the server, and off you go. 4 steps. We'll discuss each step here very quickly. I use this jokes API over here because the jokes API requires no key and it's very easy to use. This makes it as simple as possible, I think. Okay, so step 1, instantiate the server. FastMCP makes it easier than with JavaScript. You just import the library and then you create a server by giving it a name. Any questions so far? Yeah, all right, that's good. This part is pretty simple. Number 2, writing a function for every tool you want to use. So you give it a name, as you said before. For example, get joke by ID. Because the joke server has a number for each joke, you can request it by an ID. IDs don't go to a zillion or infinity, they end at 451. So I put in the description over here, get joke with a specific ID and a valid range to give a hint to LLMs what they actually should be doing. It should be an integer, it shouldn't be 5.6. It can't be pi, it can be a negative number, and there's the range it can actually be. LLMs might read this and know what it is. In case they don't read this and know what this is, you also have parameters that are typed. So in Python, you use type hinting. In JavaScript, you use a thing called Z, which is a thing which does type checking at runtime. And you give it these kinds of hints, so it knows, okay, actually in Python, for example, it should be an integer, it should be greater or equal to 1, less or equal to 451. You can give it also examples of usage for more information. The more you give it, the more it'll have an understanding of what you actually want from it. Because again, it's an LLM, it just kind of knows what you want by reading human text. But also, it's good to have these things that are more programmer, like specific Python type hints or specific JavaScript Z-based constraints, because then you can tell it what to do, and it gets, instead of you trying the API out and getting an error, you'll get an error earlier in the process. It'll try things a couple times if it needs to. Number two, write this function for each tool. This is the simplest tool that I have in the joke server, because all it does is return the same string every time. So MCP tool uses Python declaration. So the Python library can then inspect this function and grab information from it and grab the function out of it and stick it into your server as a tool. It's called getConsistentJoke. It gets the name from the function name over here. And the doc string there is the description. And then it returns the same string every time. I think I forgot the close quote over here, unfortunately, because I must have cut it off on the slide. So that would fail. But you get the idea. What's brown and sticky? Thank you. I'm also a father. When I became a dad, I got all these dad jokes in my head, and now they won't leave. So number three, you define the configurations of MCP once for each tool, add them to your server. We did that just now, actually, because FastMCP is so convenient. We actually have in there embedded the title of the tool, the description, and everything else is already in there. And then use a transport, and off you go. And here we just do MCP run. There's this little check over there to make sure you're not in the wrong environment somehow. And there's two different transports you can use. One is standard I/O. That's for local use. It's like characters in, characters out. You know standard I/O from your days using C or whatever, or using Unix. I always use that. HTTP is for running it over the web, which you can do with a remote MCP server, which can be useful, for example, if you're like LLMs running on the website, like ChatGPT, for example. But if you're doing this to try it out yourself, or even for the real world, you often use standard I/O. That's kind of it. Here's the server, actually, the joke server in a very, very small miniature version, which was very easy to set up over here. I just import the library, I give it a name, I define a single function which returns a single thing, I start it up. So getting started isn't so bad if you know the syntax and know what you're looking for. To make it a little more useful than that, you can do things that are a little more useful. For example, this calls the jokes API, but all this does that's different is it just does a get over here and uses the API URL, which I defined earlier, with the right path. It gets some JSON. I've got a helper function that extracts the JSON, and then it returns this string. Not too bad. And finally, input validation can be important. We showed this before. For getting a joke by ID is how it looks in the real world. Now it looks a little more complicated, but it's just simply the ID annotated with this field over here. It's an integer. It's got a certain range, returns a string. And then I just call the API once again with the correct path and get the result, extract the JSON, make it into a string, and we're done. Yeah?
It's more open-ended, like say a joke, then the ID would be a random choice to what to return.
If I said just say a joke, I don't know, let's find out.
Because we are responding with a specific ID.
Great question. Tell me a joke. I don't know. Oh, didn't use the tools at all. So it happens sometimes too. You have to actually maybe define your tools with different kinds of doc strings, different descriptions, so it knows what to do with this. Because I do have actually, tell me a random joke. This will probably call the random joke thing. Yeah. So that's an interesting question. So making it use the tool you want it to use can be a bit of a puzzle sometimes. There's an art to that. Okay. Yeah.
Can you define the trigger? I mean, the
What's that? The trigger?
Yeah, the prompt to trigger the tool user. I mean, how does it know when to use the tool?
Yeah, that's the important question. The answer is it just kind of knows. It's been trained that we give it a prompt saying if you want to do something, you can use the tool. And it's biased towards using tools now. It wasn't before. Not all LLMs have this bias towards using tools. They might do things themselves. Like translation, they do it themselves pretty well, almost as well as DeepL in some cases even. But yeah, if it recognizes something over there, it's trained to actually output. It knows that the most probable thing that you want actually is to use a tool and output this tool stuff. So it just kind of works. You should try it out because it feels like it shouldn't work. But it actually does work in most cases very well. I can discuss more about how to do this in JavaScript, but I know we're running out of time, literally. So Do you have any questions about all those things or comments about what you've seen so far? Unless I have more slides. Oh, if you want to, one more thing that's important. If you're doing this yourself and working on your own server, the MCP inspector is really useful because otherwise you don't know why things aren't working. You can use console error or other means to log stuff for yourself. And you can use this to actually try your tools out, see what they're doing, see what output happens, see what parameters they're supposed to take. It's really a great way to test things out because once you get into the actual client, you're looking at log files, and it's kind of a pain to do it. These actually are the same thing. The Python Fast MCP thing just runs the Node version of this. It's just like a way of doing it in Python or with the Python command.
Could you contrast this with microservices?
Microservices. I guess they're not dissimilar, but this is specifically designed for LLMs to use. So unless you're using an LLM, it's not really worth using this, I don't think. What you might want to do, actually, if you have a certain service you want to expose to AI clients, you make a server that actually makes a tool out of that. You can wrap your service in a tool. It's a common use case, I think. Yeah.
Can you really briefly talk about how you would like train this? Because AIs can be trained, correct? Is this type of AI able to be trained as well, to be more specific in a certain genre of topics?
Say more about this question. To be trained to do what? To use MCP or to use certain tools?
So let's say I had like a software, for example, I wanted about, I don't know, like stretching, right? Would I be able to add the MCP, LLM, all that, get that sorted, and then be able to train that AI agent to get better at outputting different stretches and stuff? This one specifically, or no?
It's kind of different than that. I mean, MCP is just a way to let it use tools. It doesn't involve any training. People often think that you can use MCP to kind of inject AI into something that doesn't already have AI, but it's actually the opposite. It makes AI more deterministic. It makes AI use tools instead of thinking out things itself. So if you had some sort of stretching thing, if you wanted to, say, like make an MCP that outputted, like, do this stretch, for example, or if it's like, Saturday afternoon, stretch your quads or something, you could then make a tool that outputted that stuff, and you could have a LLM that actually used it. But yeah, it's kind of different than that.
So if I wanted to have something like list me 5 stretches for my shoulder, then you can give it a tool based on that, and that specifically would be able to.
Precisely. Instead of thinking of its own knowledge of stretches from what it saw on the internet, it could then call your stretching, information tool and get your information, and then return that. Exactly. So it lets you control what it outputs also. If you had like a stretching business, you could say, you should call this number over here, and do this thing over here. Other comments or questions?
And that's why it would be tools plus maybe databases within React or other things. It's basically a mix. It's a protocol to work with a mix of things based on what an LLM is.
It really is just tools in this case. But if you want to have databases, if you want to use data that accesses, the tools would access the data, figure out what was needed, and then return that. It's all on the tool side. So it makes it easy on the client. All it does is make a request to your tool. The tool does all the work in the background, whatever it needs to do. Yes, it's a connection layer between LLMs and like traditional computing stuff. Exactly. So there also are tools that, for example, that you make JIRA tickets, or actually modify databases in various ways, or do research in databases. All these things out there exist too. If you have other questions or comments about this, or you want to try this out and you have some problems, and see me afterwards. I know we're kind of late here, so. I've been Ben Morss. Say hello afterwards if you want to say hello, and thanks for watching the talk and taking part in the talk.